Back to school savings are officially in session at Tanger Outlets. Shop tax-free August 2nd through 6th and save up to 70% off the latest school styles. The best of apparel, footwear, accessories, and more. Save at Nike Factory Store, American Eagle, Gap Outlet, Crocs, Under Armour, Banana Republic Factory, and hundreds more. There's always something happening. Discover the latest fun and events all season long. Tanger Outlets, your savings destination.
Welcome back to Die Hard on a Blank, the podcast where we explore the influence of Die Hard on action cinema, one action movie at a time. Today, we have a bonus conversation with Gaylyn Fraiche, who is Curtis Hanson's assistant on the last movie we covered, The River Wild.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. We're so excited to talk about this movie that we love. So to kick it off, what are some of your memories from making this movie?
Well, I mean, Curtis was one of the smartest people I'd ever met and really understood the suspense genre incredibly well. I learned so much from him on that. This was kind of his biggest, probably action, well, certainly up until that time. But, I mean, getting to work with Meryl Streep, Kevin Bacon, David Strathairn, John C. Reilly before he was known at all, and then Joe Mazzello was coming off of Jurassic Park and is now directing, but we had a very small cast overall. Benjamin Bratt was in it too, but so we were all kind of together. I learned also so much about. We had such a long R&D phase of figuring out how to shoot all that river stuff and putting cameras in the raft and rigging, because they really were very conscious about not wanting to just put cameras on the side of the river and shooting it from the side. So Robert Elswit was our amazing DP, who has also since won an Oscar. So we had just a really, and everyone was gung-ho. We brought a lot of people together from different walks of life too, because we had this, we called them the River Crew, who were our river rafting experts who came in, and we had some stunt people, but we ended up using a lot of the River Crew as stunt people later, because these were people who were like living, they were ski bums, and then they were river guides, and they were the coolest people, and they'd never made a movie before. So we had quite an experience. I mean, it was, and helicoptering in and out of location was something. There were just so many things about it, but working with Curtis and having that, I say now, especially producing myself, is the access that I had was amazing, because, producing was different back then, and I was his sounding board for everything, even when I didn't want to be, because I was in my 20s and I'd be like, I just want it, but he was great. I was there through all the post of the movie and even the international release. So I started with him in prep when we didn't even know where exactly we were going to shoot, and went through the entire process and really just had a front row seat to everything. So I realize, especially now, how valuable that was to me, and still is.
It's kind of amazing to hear, Curtis Hanson, Robert Elswit, like these kind of legends of filmmaking now, in this earlier part of their career. And not to mention, Meryl and David Strathairn and all of these, it's just unbelievable. But so what was it like? How observing Curtis and working with him, and I'm a big Curtis Hanson fan. How did he kind of bridge this sort of river stuff with the more intimate scenes between Meryl and David Strathairn? Because this movie is always moving, right? Like, from the minute they get on the river, there's this forward momentum, and then it pauses. Like, how did he run the set? And how did he direct the set? And how does he work with actors? And was there any big takeaway for you from, I'm sure there was, from observing him dealing with the actors and keeping this movie moving? I
think, we had a good amount of rehearsal. I think that Meryl trained for 4 hours a day to get into that kind of shape, so she learned to sculpt, from the opening. It was really interesting that we went to Boston, I think for 3 days first, but we must have been in rehearsal for we were in Oregon for a long time. That's where we did all the kind of research and development, and they were all out, developing the rigs and doing all the things that they needed to do. And then when we prepped, we probably were in Boston for maybe 5 days. Maybe I can't remember now if we shot 2 or 3 days. But there was a whole helicopter scene with David that didn't end up in the movie, where he was told that he needed to work for this trip. But we used the Harvard. I think she was the coach of the Harvard women's rowing team to do Meryl's sculling for that opening. So we kind of started out Boston, then went back to Oregon, and then Montana. We shot so much of it in Montana. But I will say we shot pretty much all the heavy lifting, actiony stuff first in Montana.
Okay.
And then we went to, we were in a little town called Libby, Montana, which was outside of Kalispell. And we were all small town. We shot 6-day weeks because we needed daylight. We all got pretty close because also where that final scene is done, we shot many. So we shot some of the stuff early. Then we really shot most of the actiony stuff. That final scene, we had to helicopter in and out of a giant rock. We shot that scene for days. And I mean, I wish I could remember how many days, but it was a huge part of the movie that we shot. And that was, it took a long time too, because we had to helicopter in and out of location, and we had 2 helicopters, and one held 3 plus the pilot and one held 4 plus the pilot. So just think about the time that it took. But it was crazy.
Oh my God.
But the interesting thing too with the cast is that they couldn't really go back to their trailer in between setups. So we all kind of hung out together, and everyone, worked together really well. But we did all of the really torturous kind of actiony stuff, and then we moved to Oregon to do the stuff kind of on the side of the river, on the banks of the river, the nighttime. That was a different state. And then it's crazy.
Wow, you'd never know.
Right? The magic of movies. So we did that, and there was some of the emotional stuff between Meryl and David, and like the scene where David tries to escape, and the stuff in the tent, and that
incredible.
But that was all still done kind of later in the movie. And then the last, I believe, 10 days of shooting, we were on a stage, which you can't tell that some of that stuff was shot on a stage.
What was on a stage?
Well, I feel like we shot the reconciliation scene between Meryl and David. We reshot that. So a couple of those intimate pieces were shot on a stage. And then the opening of the movie, when she's in the house with David and the kids, and they're running around chasing each other and the dog, that set was built on the stage. So that was sort of shot at the end also. So it was kind of, that stuff was built, and then any kind of pickup, stuff that we needed to get closer and do with better lighting. And it was freezing, and by the end of, we wrapped in probably the first or second week of November, and we beat the snow by like a week because we had some second unit stuff that stayed, and they got snow. So we started in the summer, and we finished, in early November, but we got out just before it snowed. But it was cold. It was definitely cold.
Oh, I can imagine it gets cold real quick. It's interesting to think that sort of the action was done.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it makes total sense, but the action was done, before, and then you have these more intimate scenes shot in an entirely different location. And of course, like, you would never know as an audience member, even as someone that kind of knows how the sausage is made with these things. I would never suspect like, oh, they shot it's really, really.
Another thing to remember about that, too, is that Meryl was in such good shape and had been training for so long. She didn't have the opportunity to train as much while we were shooting. She needed to stay in shape. Do you know what I'm saying? But it was better to shoot all that in the beginning when she was kind of fresh and ready to go, as to dragging it out longer. So that, I think, was another rationale behind it, too, besides just weather and wanting to get all our daylight stuff done earlier in the year before we started losing light. But she was in, like I said, she was in great shape. I mean, she's just a pro in everything she does. So I think that was also part of the rationale, is to just get all the heavy lifting done in the beginning.
So speaking of Meryl, this podcast is called Die Hard on a Blank. And up to this point, we've done something like 20 something episodes. And to be honest, it's been really dude heavy. I mean, it's all of these movies that follow in the footsteps of Die Hard are, Arnold Schwarzenegger, or you have, more Bruce Willis movies. You have Sylvester Stallone. You have all these sort of machismo guys. And this movie is really significant because it's the first time you have a woman sort of as the corollary to the John McClane character, if that makes sense. So she's kind of Meryl is kind of the Bruce Willis in the Die Hard formula. And I'm wondering, like, did it feel significant that, like, this was an action movie led by a woman?
It's funny because when you said that, and I think I saw that I never really thought of it that way. But now, as I've also been in the business longer, I think I do. But I think it was more about having Meryl Streep be the woman. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, because it was such a departure for her. And I have so many funny stories, but one of the funniest things is later when she was doing the interviews and when they did the press junket and all that, when she saw the movie cut together, which she did see many times, and I snuck her into screenings out in Santa Ana and things like that. She was more freaked out when she saw it cut together because it looked so good. I mean, she did a lot of stuff, don't get me wrong, but because it was edited so well, and she kind of looked back and went, I can't believe I did that. And we would laugh about it because I would say to her, oh my gosh, do you remember that day? And she would just go, Gaylyn, I can't believe I did any of that stuff. And I go, well, it wasn't all you. And she's like, I know, but I still can't believe I did this movie. And I also think she really did it for her daughters. You know what I mean? She's got 3 daughters, and her youngest was, like 2 at the time, and was with us for all of the shoot. And I think, she knew what she was doing. She knew it was a departure for her. But I also think she felt safe in the hands of Curtis, who knew how to direct women, knew how to direct these movies and give it a real emotional core. I think her being a mother who's trying to save her child was really what was also so appealing to her about it. It had to have that strong emotional current throughout, a woman who's saving her family, but like I said, I don't ever think we thought, ooh, a woman. And I will tell you, when I was hired, they were just in the process of making her deal. And I said, I was just kind of like, oh, great. But it was also just the fact that she was Meryl Streep doing this movie, period, the end, was just, but I don't know that and I don't think Curtis and I ever talked about the fact that it was a woman doing this type of movie. It was more like, it's Meryl and we got the best possible person. How lucky are we?
Yeah. I mean, she's incredible. I mean, she's always incredible, but she's incredible in this movie. And it's such a sort of thoughtful kind of divorce drama that becomes a thriller, and in a way that's kind of like, man, they don't make them like this anymore. And one of the things that came in our discussion earlier was how, like, Curtis Hanson, kind of does some of his best work in the noir genre or the thriller genre. And I'm wondering if there were, like, in your conversations with him, were there any films that he cited? He was like, oh, we should all take a look at this, or we should all be thinking about this Hitchcock film. Was there any of that in the discussion, or was he looking back at other things for influences that you can recall?
I wish I remembered. Curtis was very much a cinephile. I mean, I know Hitchcock was definitely, but oh my gosh, I'm trying to think. I don't remember any specifics, but he was definitely a fan of that genre. And, he was coming off like Hand That Rocks the Cradle, and he knew he was also a great director with women. He knew how to get those performances, but as a respectful, really, he understood that genre so well. But there were things like, I remember, and even watching it recently again, the scene in the raft where she kind of begs Kevin Bacon's character, Wade, not to try to take them down the river. And I think that, that's when they're tied up and she starts kind of begging, but she kind of laughs and loses and and I remember saying to him afterwards, did you know she was going to do that? In other words, did you direct her to do that? And he said, no, that's all her, and so it was just what she brought to the character and even just the subtleties, but the deaf, having the deaf father was a very interesting, and those are the kind of things I forget about sometimes because it seemed like such a small part in the beginning. And then I go back and look at the movie and I go, oh, I forgot about that. And we cast a real deaf actor who wasn't really an actor and, and all those kind of things. And she, either knew or learned sign language because she's Meryl Streep. And I did some research where she asked if she could hear some accents of that Pacific Northwest. And it's not a strong accent, but I went and recorded some people for her and gave her, I'm sure, a cassette tape. And I hear now in the movie just slight little things that she'll say so subtly. And she's just as, she's as good as it gets. But
it's like invisible technique, the best kind of technique. She's doing something. You don't even know she's doing it. And then it comes through subconsciously. That's really...
I'll tell you a very funny story, though, about the action.
Please.
In the very beginning of the movie, when I think they hit just one little rapid, and I think that when David's character falls out of the back of the boat and the whole thing. So Meryl was steering the raft, and she had really trained. So whenever she could do the things that she could do without a stunt woman, he would put her in. And this was kind of early in the shoot. And, like I said, we had a whole safety team. Everybody was ready to go. But I will tell you that was glacier water too. So it was cold even in the summer. And I think she did the take a couple of times on a kind of wide, and maybe the third time or fourth time she fell out of the raft. They hit the raft and she fell out and she was pulled under, and they pulled her out and she was soaking wet, and he asked her to do it one more time. And all of us were kind of like, and she, well, wait, and she looked at him and she went, and she put her finger up and she said, one more time. That's it. And he said to me, and I think he even said publicly, he said, that's when I knew she was in. She was all the way in. Because if she had said, like I said, it was probably the first or second week. And if she had said, nah, I'm done. You got what you need. I'm wet and cold. And she was never like that. And there were a lot of the scenes where the helicopter was flying over them. I look back now and I go, wow, too bad we didn't have drones. But you can see in those corridors the water, because the helicopter's flying over them, shooting them in the raft, towards the end when it's just, her and Kevin and John and double for Joe. And what they would do normally, what Curtis would do is he would take the doubles, the river guides, and have them do it and show the cast. And then they would decide if they wanted to do it or not. And so,
Wow.
they got bigger and bigger as time went on, and there was one in particular where the helicopter was flying over them and the river crew went down and showed them, and they were standing there. And Kevin said, Curtis, no fucking way. And Meryl goes, oh my God, thank you. She goes, I never want to be the girl. I never want to be the woman. I never want to be the one who says, I don't want to do it. So she was like so happy that Kevin said, no way. And so,
Yeah, totally. Oh my God, of
so
course.
that's one of my favorites, because it's just like when she said that too, she goes, I never want to be the one to say no. So she was so happy that Kevin was.
Shop Plato's Closet tax-free August 2nd through 4th for back-to-school styles. We sell the trendy, gently used styles you need to make a difference in the world and in your wallet for back-to-school shopping. Save up to 70% off regular retail prices by choosing recycled styles. Save even more when you shop tax-free this weekend. Make a change that others can respect and repeat. Shop Plato's Closet in North Charleston and West Ashley this year for your back-to-school looks. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.
What's the easiest choice you can make? Window instead of middle seat? Picking a vendor who sends a great gift basket? Outsourcing business tasks you hate? What about selling with Shopify? Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit a million orders stage. Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/try. Go to shopify.com/try now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/try.
Imagine Meryl Streep thinking she can't be the one to say no to something also is just, I mean, it's Meryl Streep. That, one thing that's so interesting is you have this incredible cast, but they spend, the way the antagonism develops between Meryl and Kevin Bacon and how much by the end of the film, to his credit, I remember seeing this movie opening night with my family. We all went together opening weekend and all being like, the biggest impression was, I hate Kevin Bacon in this movie so much. Like, he's the devil. He's awful. And so I have to ask, you mentioned that they shot the action and then they shot some of the more you shot some of the more intimate scenes later. Like, what was the vibe like? You said there's a lot of camaraderie because you're not flying people back and forth. Like, was it like cameras would cut and everyone would be like back to goofing and relaxing? Or did it feel like Meryl and Kevin kind of had to keep their distance because of the intensity of the performance?
We all hung out. We hung out and went to parties on the weekend. And funny enough, Kevin, we had a couple of parties where the cast performed for us. So Meryl would sing and Kevin was up there playing and no, they were all buddies and we everybody hung out together. So I think at that point too, it was just, they were such pros. I do think that, Kevin, especially, there was a little bit of like, oh my gosh, Meryl Streep, you know what I mean? And then everybody got to know each other and she's so down to earth. And we would all watch dailies together. Curtis, this was back when dailies were screened, normally for the director and the DP and everybody. But we were in rural Montana. We had a small town. We had a old furniture store that was our production office. And upstairs, they set up a screening room. And Curtis's attitude was anyone who worked on the movie can come watch dailies.
Oh, that's great.
So Meryl would come pretty much every night and her daughter would come and we would sit on the floor. There weren't that many women on there. We would all hang out and sometimes we would drink wine and we would all screen dailies and everyone would cheer. And if the River guys were in stunts, they would come and they would watch. But obviously it was Curtis and Robert and, any of the other, crew. But there was a real camaraderie and everyone wanted the movie to succeed. So there really wasn't that. And I know exactly what you're talking about, but I think that, the whole method thing, they didn't need it,
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it's just one of those things where the intensity is so palpable. Like the scene when she's like, I'm going to kill you. Like, it just feels like the idea that then, they call cut and it's like, we're back to normal again. I mean, of course, that's what professionals do, right? But like, I just can't imagine because the level of antagonism between those two characters is just next level.
Well, the fight scene was and I still watch that, and that's intense to me when Kevin's beating, hits Joe, the little boy, and then also is like beating up David's character in front of his wife and son. That's a very intense scene. And I think we all felt it when we were doing it, but we'd say cut and they'd start laughing, And so it was very much like,
Wow.
yeah, I think there was just a mutual respect between these actors too. And I think, when you've got Meryl Streep, everyone's bringing their A game.
Oh yeah, I mean, you're not like showing up to that set like I still got to learn my lines. Like you're 100%, you're 100% there. I can imagine. I want to talk a little bit about Joe Mazzello quickly because I'm a little older than him, but we're roughly the same age, and he was I was very aware of him as a kid actor, and I think he is incredible in this movie because he gets this is kind of a divorce drama, right? It's like Kramer versus Kramer if it took place, on a river and they had to, battle another character. And I'm just so curious, what was the experience like working with him? Like, because he's so raw and real, and he screams like a kid would scream, and he's scared in a way that there's no like frills to it. So I'm curious, like, what was it like working with him, and how did Curtis work with him, and what was the experience like?
I think, he was, and it's funny because I did meet with him a few years ago, and he's directing now. And
wow.
Yeah. And he was just talking about how he grew up working with these amazing directors, but he was such a young professional. And now having worked with a lot, like he was still a kid, his parents were there with him the whole time. But I think that he also knew, and also you also have like Meryl and David who were parents who treated him, but Curtis was very respectful of him. And I still laugh. One of the funniest things to me is in that fight scene when Kevin slaps him and Curtis wanted a tear.
Oof.
They had the tear stuff ready. And, I feel like he was maybe 9 or 10 at the most. And they had the tear stuff ready to give him the tear because Curtis was like, when he turns, I want to see that he's holding back that tear. And he said, I can do it. I don't need the tear stuff. And a very just professional, young professional, I don't need the tear. I can do it. And Curtis said, okay. And he did it. And it was like, is it enough? And Curtis was like, well, I just want it to be able to show on screen. And he said, well, I would like to do it once without doing that. And Curtis said, okay. And he did it. So he was he was already, he'd done Jurassic Park already. And it I think Jurassic Park came out when we were shooting. So interestingly, he got recognized a lot in our little small town because he'd just been in Jurassic Park. But having worked with young actors, they've either got that professionalism and this is what I'm doing. And he was just the best of that. And Curtis was great with him. But like I said, you also had him very protected by the people like the Meryls and the Davids and the Kevins who all, had kids and just, were just great to him. And he was, like I said, same thing. He was just a member of the team because for the most part, we had 5 actors and the dog through the whole movie, so we had a few people come and go, but that was our group.
Yeah. It's amazing how, again, a lot of these movies that we've talked about before, Cliffhanger, Last Action Hero, like they're massive in scale and they're, I love all those movies, but there's something kind of intense about the chamber piece nature of this movie and the fact that it's really just like the building kind of relationships between the characters.
Well, Carrie Fisher came in and did uncredited rewrites on the movie. So I don't know if people know that. And, she and Meryl were close friends and had done Postcards from the Edge together. So I think she really brought a lot of that. And that was, once Meryl was on board. So I think that also made a huge difference. And Curtis is also was a writer himself. So, we had the massaging of, I said, one of my favorite that I tell people that I forget about these stories sometimes is that I think they were hashing out that reconciliation scene between Meryl and David. And so it was really just some massaging here and there. But the 3 of them went into Curtis's trailer between takes one day, and I was called in, and And like I said, I was in my early 20s, so it's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
And we all knew each other by this time. But Curtis literally they sat on the little couch in the trailer facing each other. And Curtis is like, they're going to act out the scene and I want you to watch. And I was like, okay.
Oh, wow.
So these two amazing actors, and they went all in, and they literally acted out this scene. And then they both turned to me and went, well, and I was like, well, what do you mean? Well, and they're like, well, did you like it? I said, yeah, it was amazing. And I really was a little speechless, but like I said, we all knew each other pretty well, but it was still, and then Curtis goes, okay, they're going to do it a few more times and you're going to write it down and go put it into the script. Cause I was doing the script revisions. So they had kind of workshopped it. And so they did it. And David made fun. I had a yellow legal pad, and I took good fast notes. But David was like, "She can't do that," and Curtis was like, "Yeah, she can. Yeah, she can." So they acted out the scene 3 or 4 times, and I literally wrote
dictated
every
it.
word.
Wow.
Yeah, so I could go and just add it into the script. But I've looked back. I've told that story because it's something you forget, and then you go. I just will never forget Meryl Streep and David Strathairn and Curtis turning to me and going, well, and I was like,
and you're in your early 20s, and it's like, okay, legends of Hollywood. Here's what but that's such a cool testament to the collaborative nature of the medium when you have the right kind of people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you another interesting tidbit, because I've been thinking about this in terms of thriller land. And, there are places now like Netflix who are trying to make these, kind of 90s, 2000 style thrillers. And like I said, I learned so much from Curtis because of the movies that he did, and he loved the genre, but I remember in rehearsals, I would be sitting in the other room while he was in the other room working with, Meryl and Kevin or, David. And he walked into me one day and he said, Meryl doesn't want to shoot him at the end because she's a mom and an anti-gun. So she really felt uncomfortable. So think about that in this action genre. I think it's very valid because, we're used to all the shoot 'em ups. It's like Die Hard with Bruce Willis with the gun and then, everything is gun, 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 gun. And so the ending of the movie was, Gail shooting Wade. And, but I remember when I say I had access, he literally walked into my little office and said, Meryl doesn't want to shoot him. Meryl doesn't want to shoot the gun. And I said, oh, what are you going to do? And he said, well, we're going to figure it out. And so I know that ending was concocted in a way that she has to shoot him. Absolutely. Do you see what I'm saying? She tests him. If you watch it, when she flicks and the bullet doesn't, and it doesn't shoot, and then you see him turn on her and go kill him, and
right.
And then she is completely justified in shooting him because it's either shoot him or her and her family, And so I look back on that now, and I don't remember specifically what the way the script was written before, but I think she just shoots him, and she, as a mother and as, she just didn't feel comfortable just blowing him away. And, but I think we came to a compromise. Curtis came to a compromise with her and probably the studio too, as to how that was going to end. But I think it was very well constructed in a way that she absolutely had to shoot him and got no joy from doing it.
It's so funny you bring that up, because when we were talking about the action in this movie, something that came up was like, you have this feeling at the end that Kevin is so good in that scene where he's like, come on, Gail, and he reverts to this kind like the lovable, fuck up that he is at the beginning of the movie when you kind of like him. And we were sort of like, in 1994, we didn't use the word gaslighting the way that we do now, but like, Wade is a classic gaslighter throughout the entire movie, the way he manipulates, her son, and the way he kind of like flirts with your sympathies for him. And I I think what's so impressive about the way that was reworked is that like he falls back on that classic move that he's done throughout the movie, and Meryl just isn't buying it anymore. But she almost does. Like, she looks at him and, you know, that mothering thing that is so interesting. That, by the way, not to be so reductive, but like part of what makes this so impressive as a diehard, if you want to consider it some sort of diehard, you know, follow-up or acolyte, is that like the considerations are different when it's a female character, you know, from the perspective of like she's thinking about different things. There's a scene earlier in this movie where she says, "I'm the mother. I'm on everyone's side." And you can feel it in that moment at the end. Like, it's a totally different sort of approach to the action genre or the suspense genre. Like, not that had never happened before, but in this, like, the golden age of action movies that we were experiencing at that time.
No, and it is, like I said, I remembered it, and when I watch it, I can totally go, oh yeah, I remember how this came about. But it was just very interesting in the wake of things are the way things are in the world, period. But that was just her. That was who she was even at that time. And I think she was very mindful of it, and being a mom and just knowing that she wanted to do a different kind of action movie. She just didn't want to. And it's a great misdirect, though, because you do think, oh, he's got it. And he got her. And she shoots into the air. And the minute he starts, you see her eyes and you see her know that bullet is still in there. And it was a test, you know. And I think the whole audience was like, oh, no, she's not going to believe him again, you know. And she was like, nope, wait, there was a way, you know. And it was her test. She gave him one more chance, and he blew it.
He totally blows it. No, that's really, really, it's a really interesting way to think about it, because I almost think now we expect in movies, because we're so well trained, we all expect the last sort of revival of the villain. Like, you know, at the end of Die Hard, Carl comes back, and Kevin Bacon doing it at the end is kind of similar, but it's manipulative again. It's him like using his charms, and Kevin Bacon is nothing if not incredibly charming in this entire movie. That's what makes it so painful, is that like you like him even when you hate him, and you hate him, but he's still Kevin Bacon.
Well, the funniest what I remember, I believe his first day of shooting is when they're at the drop-in getting the license, and he meets Joe's character, and they talk about the hat and the whole thing. His swagger, it just, I can watch that now, and I think that was Kevin Bacon day one shooting, and that swagger was just such a, you know, it was just great, because you're like, I know exactly who this guy is. And I remember one point saying to Curtis, Kevin's eyes are so blue, or something like that. And he goes, we lit him for that. And I was like, oh, okay. And he was like, well, it's working, right? I was like, yeah, it's working. As you know, I came up with Kevin Bacon Footloose, and I remember sitting in the one day and going, Kevin Bacon's in the other room, you know, and but it was just, but yeah, he was that guy that you like in the beginning, and when you watch it, you know, when you watch it deteriorate and see what a bad guy he is, it's yeah, it makes it harder when he's painful. The charming Kevin Bacon. I think he got nominated for a Golden Globe for that.
He did. Meryl and him, which is really significant considering this is broadly considered an action movie. It's a testament to the power of it. And, you know, Kevin Bacon is just so wonderful. I feel like he's been a part of my life as a movie lover my entire life. And so to go back and watch this now when he's 35 and looks like he just left like a Pearl Jam concert and is so charming, it's just really, really wonderful. I have a couple more questions for you, and then I'll let you go. So you were saying you were sort of handling the rewrites and working on that aspect of it. And one thing that, you know, I'd watched this movie, I've probably seen this movie 4 or 5 times over the course of my life, but I'd never watched it until recently as an adult with a wife and kids. And I'm curious, like, one of the things that this movie seems to really be getting at is like the male ego and insecurity, Strathairn versus Bacon, that like it really plays in this really interesting way. And I'm wondering, like, is that the kind of thing that as you're doing rewrites, you're talking about? Like, are the themes of the movie coming through, or is it the way it feels in the movie, which is like character as action. The characters aren't talking all that much about how they feel, except in those more intimate moments, but you can feel sort of Strathairn's insecurity playing out on the screen.
I feel like it was in the script as, when the script came in. I think it is interesting that you say that too, because she's just a strong female character, and you get that these two people are very different. And we don't really know. I mean, he's an architect, and he's, you see it in that opening scene too, where he tells the dog to get off the bed, and the dog won't get off the bed. Then she looks at the dog and says, Maggie, get off the bed, and it's really funny because the dog is used really to symbolize that too. And then when he ends up with the dog and the dog jumps and he says, that's the first time you ever listened to me. Mm-hmm. It is a little like he felt emasculated in his own home, but I think in some ways it was because I think he was never around,
mm-hmm.
And it was that. So I don't really remember talking specifically about it, or I probably wasn't in,
mm-hmm.
The rehearsals or anything, but, David is so good at that, and he was comfortable playing that role from the way it's set up, that she was this cool river chick, and he was probably the nerdy architect. Like when Benjamin Bratt's character shows up and starts talking about how great she was. Mm-hmm. So this mismatch of a couple, and then he has to, kind of gain his strength again to try to help save her, even though she basically does it. But I was working for writers, and they said to me, two male writers, they were like, I can't believe if that were my family, I would have cut my way out of that tent and I would have gone and stabbed those guys, and that would have never been an issue. And I was like, right.
Sure.
But that is the way, and that whole scene where he's like, I'm going to get the gun. And it's him trying to rise and be a kind of a different guy for his family. So I wish I could say I don't remember and I wasn't privy, but David was just perfect for that role in every way. So I'm sure there was some discussion even before he was cast, because I know that, Curtis took a lot of meetings to figure out who he wanted to play that role.
Well, it really resonates with me. One reason tangentially, which is I'm from Boston. I grew up there. And so I sort of kind of know the type of what you would describe as kind of the classic professional beta male who's making the money, but not necessarily running the house. And I think for anyone who often feels like, man, I'm the less brave person in my marriage. That's one thing that this movie really, really does is this strong central female character and the kind of husband who's a little I'm scared, maybe doesn't want to go down the river or doesn't know how to take action. I think it's one of the really great things about the movie. So after this, this as an action movie podcast, so I would be remiss if I did not ask you about working on Strange Days with Catherine Bigelow and how that experience differed from
Well,
this
I hate
one.
to say it, I was only in post on that movie, so okay. I really only got to work with her. Funny enough, I was on the River Wild for such a long time, and then I was really just her assistant in post. So I wasn't sad that I did not shoot however many nights they shot in Los Angeles, because that movie was pretty much all at night, and so a very different experience. But I can't really speak to the production of it because I really wasn't there for the production. I was only there for the post. So I just think
Gotcha.
On the River Wild, like I said, I remember meeting Curtis at Universal on a Friday night and him saying, well, we just signed Meryl Streep. And I said, I think my mouth dropped open for a second. And then I went, okay. Because I hate to say it, but you understand in the business, sometimes you're at a point, you're freelance and you're like, you need a job, and you get a call from a friend who goes, hey, this director called us and he's got a movie for Universal. And, and this was back in the day too, where you had to call the DGA to get someone's credits. You couldn't just look them up on IMDb. And it was like, oh, Hand That Rocks the Cradle, Bad Influence, amazing
movies.
But also kind of, and Curtis would acknowledge this, they were kind of B movies. And so this was his elevation to the next level and working with this level of talent. But I look at LA Confidential and I remember,
Yeah.
he gave me that book. That's a really interesting one night, or what we were in Oregon, and he handed me a beat up copy that he got at a secondhand bookstore and said, because by that time too, I was reading scripts for him, and he was getting everything. So every thriller in the world was spoiled for me for the next 3 years, because he was getting, he was getting, not necessarily offered, but everything was getting sent to him. And, but he handed me the LA Confidential book and said, read this and tell me what you think. And I said, okay. And I'd never read James Ellroy. And I read it and I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And he said, I'm going to be, I'm involved with it. He didn't know if it was going to be next. There was a lot going on. But he asked me to do an outline of the book for him. And so sometimes I got to go work in the trailer at night while we were shooting and do the outline of the book. And then I did the outline, and then he came back, because that's a very tough book to outline, and said, yeah, maybe a chapter by chapter synopsis. And I said, I wish I still had it, because I look back on that movie and I look at that script and I say, I know where this started and how difficult that was. But I feel like he just was such an incredibly smart and just loved movies. I learned so much working with him and watching that. I wasn't with him by the time he made LA Confidential, but he did send me a version of the script with a note that I still have. And I went to the set and visited once, and he said I got to go to an early screening, and we stayed in touch for a long time. And so I was always very grateful to have that time with someone who was so smart.
Yeah. No, and well, this probably won't shock you, but because of this kind of show, there's a lot of dad talk on this podcast. Phil and I are both dads. We saw a lot of these movies with our dads, and I have such a distinct memory of going to see LA Confidential on a Saturday afternoon the week it came out with my dad, and my dad just being floored by it, knocked over by it, and just how good it was. And that made me go backwards and start watching Curtis Hanson movies, and realizing he did, I'm 13, 14, 15 at the time. I was like, oh, he did River Wild. And I went back and watched that, and my parents loved The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, all these movies. And The River Wild is such, as you mentioned earlier, there's no LA Confidential without The River Wild, because it's sort of his step into this much more elevated, sort of what would be considered higher brow, right? It's a really important movie.
It's funny too, and I remember this well. Like I said, I was reading for him, and by the end too, we were he had an office in his house, and he was, when we were done with post and we were just waiting for the release of the movie, and I would be reading things, and we went over to his agency, and we were talking about what his next movie would be, and he brought me into the room, and they were all these different types, and there was one, and I can't remember if it ever got made, but it was very similar to Dead Calm. It was, and I should. Maybe at the time they were looking at Brad Pitt as, the guy that comes in and whatever. And of course, agents were wanting to get him another movie right away. And he said something to me about it, and he goes, it was always, I'd read something and we'd discuss it, and I'd say, well, you should read this or whatever. And he was like, well, it's pretty good. And it's kind of, and I said, do you want to be the guy who always does a movie where there's an interloper? I mean, you've done so many of those at this point. And he kind of went, He was actually looking at doing The Alienist next, and that just kind of never came together. Yeah,
oh, wow.
and I sat, and I think I had to sit in a chair and read that book all day. But he was really, he was good at that type of movie, but after The River Wild, it was time for him to break out and do something different. And I think that's why, LA Confidential was his passion project, and he grew up in LA and is a child of cinema, wrote for one of the magazines, and just knew so much. And he was saving those postcards. He would collect those all around LA, and, the Frolic Room and all those. He was just, he was an historian of Los Angeles too. So LA Confidential was really his passion project, as it should have been. And
really amazing movie. Yeah. So speaking of IMDb, which you mentioned before, I was just, looking at your IMDb this morning and some of the films that you worked on after this, like Green Mile, Best in Show, Proof of Life, which is a movie I love. And you've been working, this for so long on so many different impressive kinds of projects. Like, we've been talking for a while. This being one of your earliest experiences in Hollywood, like, was there a big takeaway or like a lesson that you learned from working on this movie that you still think like resonates every day when you go to work? You're on set now. Is there something you think like, oh, I learned this from Curtis, or I saw this happened on the set? Or do you feel like you bring those lessons that you learned on the River Wild into your day to day?
I really do. And I will tell you, to me, one of the funniest things is like, and it's working in like television movies like I am right now, an executive producer on those, you're really like a non-writing EP. And the director comes in and oftentimes you've been involved way longer than the director, and sometimes they're longer afterwards. But I think I have a great respect for directors no matter when they come in. And I personally, I think, I say at this point I've worked for 2 Oscar-winning directors, and which is pretty amazing. But then at Castle Rock, that was different. I was more an assistant and then in development, but same thing. The level of directors, the Frank Darabont's and the Taylor Hackfords and the Christopher Guest and all these people. And I think that you just, have this vision that they have. And I like to say to directors that I even work with now, I'm like, I'm here to support you and we're going to get the best movie. Now, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to do everything possible to support you. And if you veer off course a little bit, I'm going to go, okay, we're going to correct course. But I feel like the way I started, and it was a different time, and television and features are a very different genre, but I have a lot of respect for directors and what they do. And I want to, give them every tool they have to be able to, uphold their vision. But at the same time, I'm there to, to pull them in the right direction if I feel, that it's not going the right way creatively. But I want them to do their jobs. And I have so much respect for directors. And a friend of mine and I were talking about that years ago and having that experience. You're the gatekeeper. When you're a good assistant on set, you're the gatekeeper for them. And you're trying to protect them because they need that mental space to be able to work. And I think that's one of the things that I feel like I understand a director's head maybe better than, especially when you worked with them for a long time. I mean, with Curtis, that was probably close to 2 years of my life that I was working on that movie from prep through. Wow. I mean, I went on location scouts because Carrie Fisher was faxing rewrites on yellow legal pads, and we were trying to get the script together. So they'd go out and scout all day, and I'd sit and go through the script revisions with Curtis, and then I would implement them into the script. And, so it was I was there I saw those locations before anyone else did, before the Keys and I saw all those locations together. So, it just learning so much, and the respect I have. Like I said, I love Proof of Life too. That movie to me is very underrated. That was an amazing script, and Tony Gilroy and Taylor Hackford.
Tony Gilroy, amazing,
and Taylor. Yeah.
Total genius, genius. That is really cool to hear, and let's love stories like everyone thinks Hollywood's so glamorous, but like Carrie Fisher was faxing, yellow pad pages of the script to us while we're on location scouting. It just goes to show you how like challenging and difficult producing movies is, and especially a movie like this where you're like, what's our location? It's a river in the middle of nowhere. Like, just really cool. Gaylyn, thank you so much for taking the time to chat here about this movie that like we love and extol the virtues of as often as we can. And it's just really great to get some insight into the making of it and the stories that you have.
Well, thank you for having me, because I will say, to me, I am incredibly proud of that movie, having, just worked on it. And like I said, I look back now sometimes and go, oh my gosh, I was so young and I had like Meryl Streep served my birthday cake, and things like that. But But I do look at how much and the things that we had to learn, like how they would release the water for the river and how many, there were just so many different things. And I think anytime you do a movie, you learn and then you forget a lot. But we had an amazing team of people, and it took that to get that movie made. It was a really hard movie to make. And, I think it's more beloved than it was when it was first released. I think it did okay, but it wasn't the blockbuster that all these male-driven action movies were. And but I know most of the people I know who have seen it actually really love it. And like I said, I watch it and I go, oh, I remember that day when I was following our safety guy up the hills, and he was saying up the wet rock, and he was saying, step where I step. And I was doing that, and he fell in front of me and broke his wrist. And I was like, I don't want to step where he's stepping anymore.
I might step somewhere else. That seems smart.
Well, the first day, I'll leave you with this, though. This is hilarious. When we were in the research and development phase, I was in the office, and there was one day where I had to bring him pages, and they took me out on a jet boat, which when we weren't using a helicopter, we were using a jet boat, and he was at the top. It was at the bottom of a little waterfall around one side, so the boat couldn't even stay still. And they had rigged the side where you had to climb up the rock. And so there were only a few people up there. And I came out, and the first AD, he was like, okay, give me the pages. And they hauled him up the crank or whatever. And I said, ask Curtis if he needs me to come up. And he said, he doesn't. And I said, ask him if he needs me to come up. And I got Curtis says, come on up. And I went, oh no. And so they had to put a life vest on me. And then they had to rig me with like a rock climbing thing. And I had to climb up the side of a rock, which I had never done, over a waterfall. Now I wasn't going to fall in, but I crawled up the side of a rock over the waterfall. And then I got up to the top, and our best boy, who was a lovely guy, unclipped me. They clipped me to another rope. And I was shaking, and they said, here, just sit here for a second and let your legs kind of, and then you had to walk over. And I walked over to Curtis and I said, so you need me? And he goes, I just wanted you to come up here and see how cool it looks. And I was like, oh, great. And then even worse, though, getting down, you basically rappelled backwards onto the bow of a boat. And it was like, here you go, just come down backwards, and one of the guys will catch you. And it was like, are you kidding? So that was my life for months but we all got really good at it, and we all developed, we called them our rock legs as opposed to our sea legs. But it was quite an experience overall, and I still have friends from that movie from many years ago, and we all hung together. It was great. That's the best part of movie making.
Oh yeah, it's the hangs. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Liam. I really appreciate it.
Die Hard on a Blank is a podcast created and hosted by Philip Gawthorne. Liam Billingham co-hosts and produces the show. Mike Mayer and Michael Sugar are the executive producers. Find us on Twitter and Instagram at DieHardOAB. Rate, review, follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Most importantly, tell your movie podcast-loving friends about Die Hard on a Blank. Special thanks to Suki Chu. See you next time on Die Hard on a Blank.
Back to school savings are officially in session at Tanger Outlets. Shop tax-free August 2nd through 6th and save up to 70% off the latest school styles. The best of apparel, footwear, accessories, and more. Save at Nike Factory Store, American Eagle, Gap Outlet, Crocs, Under Armour, Banana Republic Factory, and hundreds more. There's always something happening. Discover the latest fun and events all season long. Tanger Outlets, your savings destination.